Hi guys. I'm going to read to you guys a little bit of our read aloud book, Number the Stars. I have permission to read this from Scholastic, the publishing company. I just want to go over a little bit of what we read before, just to remind ourselves. The chapter before, remember that Anne-Marie's mom had gotten hurt while running back on the path, and Anne-Marie and her had found the package that was dropped by Mr. Rosin on the steps by the porch. And Anne-Marie knew that it was important that they had that, so Anne-Marie, being the brave person that she is, decided to go and take it to her Uncle Henrik. And so Anne-Marie's mom told her to go fill up a basket with things like bread and milk and cheese and act like a silly little girl who's just delivering her lunch to her uncle, and to hide that package in the bottom of the basket. And that if she was to get stopped by anybody, the Nazi soldiers or anybody, that she was just supposed to pretend that she was a silly little girl. And so remember, she's walking through the woods, and she's telling herself the story about Little Red Riding Hood that she used to tell to her little sister Kirsty. And she's saying all these things to herself to just kind of keep herself calm. And then she keeps hearing things in the bushes. And remember, she turns the corner and she's met by 4 Nazi soldiers with dogs. And so she's a little scared. So this is chapter 15, and the title of this chapter is My Dogs Smell Meat. Anne-Marie's mind raced. She remembered what her mother had said. If anyone stops you, you must pretend to be nothing more than a silly little girl. She stared at the soldiers. She remembered how she had stared at the others, frightened when they had stopped her on the street. Remember back to chapter 1 when her and Ellen were running on the street and it kind of frightened her? Kirsty hadn't been frightened. Kirsty had been, well, nothing more than a silly little girl, angered because the soldiers had touched her hair that afternoon. She had known nothing of danger, and the soldier had been amused by her. Anne-Marie willed herself with all of her being to behave as Kirsty would. Now, this is hard to do because Anne-Marie and Kirsty are very different. Good morning, she said carefully to the soldiers. They looked her up and down in silence. Both dogs were tense and alert. The 2 soldiers who held the leashes wore thick gloves. What are you doing here? One of them asked. Anne-Marie held out her basket with the thick loaf of bread visible. My uncle forgot his lunch and I'm taking it to him. He's a fisherman. Remember, she's saying exactly what her mom told her to say, and she's acting like she knows nothing else. The soldiers were looking around. Their eyes glanced behind her and scanned the bushes on either side. Are you alone? One asked. Anne-Marie nodded. Yes, she said. One of the dogs growled, but she noticed that both dogs were looking at the lunch basket. One soldier stepped forward. The other and the 2 holding the dogs remained where they were. You came out before daybreak just to bring a lunch? Why doesn't your uncle eat fish? What would Kirsty reply? Anne-Marie tried to giggle the way her sister might. Uncle Henrik doesn't even like fish, she said, laughing. He says he sees too much of it and smells too much of it. Anyway, he wouldn't eat it raw, she made a face. Well, I suppose he would if he were starving. But Uncle Henrik always has bread and cheese for lunch. Now remember, Anne-Marie normally wouldn't say anything like that. She normally wouldn't talk like that, but she's having to think like her younger sister right now. Keep chattering, she told herself, as Kirsty would, a silly little girl. I like fish, she went on. I like it the way my mother cooks it. Sometimes she rolls it in breadcrumbs and... The soldier reached forward and grabbed the crisp loaf of bread from the basket. He examined it carefully. Then he broke it in half, pulling the two halves apart with his fist. That would enrage Kirsty, she knew. "Don't!" she said angrily. "That's Uncle Henrik's bread. My mother baked it." Now, to me, I'm thinking that up until now, we've always talked about how Kirsty is a sassy little girl. She thinks of fairy tales. She's very young, so she doesn't understand the war. But to me, right there, if that were Kirsty saying that to the soldiers, I would think that would show just a little bit of bravery from Kirsty, because she's stepping up and telling those soldiers what she thinks. So I think it's a little bit of both of Anne-Marie's bravery and Anne-Marie's thoughts of what Kirsty would do. The soldier ignored her. He tossed the two halves of the loaf to the ground, one half in front of each dog. They consumed it, each snapping at the bread and gulping it so that it was gone in an instant. "Have you seen anyone in these woods?" the soldier barked the question at her. "No, only you." Anne-Marie stared at him. "What are you doing in the woods anyways?" "You're making me late. Uncle Henrik's boat will leave before I get there with his lunch, or what's left of his lunch." The soldier picked up the wedge of cheese. He turned it over in his hand. He turned to the three behind him and asked them something in their language, and one of them answered "Nein," which means no in German, in a bored tone. Anne-Marie recognized the word. The man had replied no. He had probably been asked, Anne-Marie thought, "Do you want this? Or perhaps, should I give it to the dogs?" The soldier continued to hold the cheese. He tossed it back and forth between his hands. Anne-Marie gave an exasperated sigh. "Could I go now, please?" she asked impatiently. The soldier reached for the apple. He noted its brown spots and made a face of disgust. And I'm thinking it's like, oh. "No meat?" he asked, glancing at the basket and the napkin that lay in its bottom. Anne-Marie gave a withering look. "You know we have no meat," she said insolently. "Your army eats all of Denmark's meat." "Please, please," she implored in her mind, "don't lift the napkin." Remember, she hid that package underneath the napkin, and so she's in her head thinking, "Please, please, please, don't look underneath there," because she knows that if she does, or if the soldiers do, she's in trouble. The soldier laughed. He dropped the bruised apple on the ground. One of the dogs leaned forward, pulling at his leash, sniffed the apple, and stepped back. But both dogs still looked intently at the basket with their ears alert, their mouths open. Saliva glistened on their smooth, pink gums. "My dogs smell meat," the soldier said. "They smell squirrels in the woods," Anne-Marie responded. "You should take them hunting." The soldier reached forward with the cheese in one hand as if he were going to return it to the basket. But he didn't. Instead, he pulled out the flowered cotton napkin, and Anne-Marie froze. "Your uncle has a pretty little lunch," the soldier said scornfully, crumpling the napkin around the cheese in his hand. "Like a woman," he added, with contempt. So the soldier's making fun of Uncle Henrik because the basket has a flowery napkin in it. Then his eyes locked on the basket. He handed the cheese and napkin to the soldier beside him. "What's that there in the bottom?" he asked in a different, tenser voice. What would Kirsty do? Anne-Marie stamped her foot. Suddenly, to her own surprise, she began to cry. "I don't know," she said, her voice choked. "My mother's going to be angry that you stopped me and made me late, and you've completely ruined Uncle Henrik's lunch, so now he'll be mad at me too." The dogs whined and struggled against the leashes, nosing forward at the basket. One of the other soldiers muttered something in German. The soldier took out the packet. "Why was this carefully hidden?" he snapped. Anne-Marie wiped her eyes on the sleeve of her sweater. It wasn't hidden any more than the napkin was. I don't know what it is. That, she realized, was true. She had no idea what was in the packet. The soldier tore the paper open while below him on the ground the dogs strained and snarled, pulling against their leashes. Their muscles were visible beneath the sleek, short-haired flesh. He looked inside, then glared at Anne-Marie. "Stop crying, you girl," he said harshly. "Your mother has sent your uncle a handkerchief. In Germany, the women have better things to do. They don't stay at home hemming handkerchiefs for their men." He gestured with a folded white cloth and gave a short laugh. At least she didn't stitch flowers on it. He flung it to the ground, still half wrapped in the paper beside the apple. The dogs lunged, sniffed at it eagerly, then subsided, disappointed again. "Go on," the soldier said. He dropped the cheese and the napkin back into her basket. "Go on to your uncle and tell him the German dogs enjoyed his bread." These soldiers seemed really, really mean. All of the soldiers pushed past her. One of them laughed, and they spoke to each other in their own language. In a moment, they had disappeared down the path in the direction from which Anne-Marie had just come. Quickly, she picked up the apple and the opened packet with the white handkerchief inside. She put them into the basket and ran around the bend toward the harbor, where the morning sky was now bright with early sun and some of the boat engines were starting their strident din. So in the package that she was hiding in the bottom of the basket was a handkerchief. To us, that seems kind of weird. Why would there be a handkerchief in the package? But it was obviously important. And so there's a little bit more left in the chapter. Let's see if we can find out why it's important. The Ingborg was still there by the dock, and Uncle Henrik was there, his light hair windblown and bright as he knelt by the nets. Anne-Marie called to him, and he came to the side, his face worried when he recognized her on the dock. She handed the basket across. "Mama sent your lunch," she said, her voice quavering. "But soldiers stopped me, and they took your bread." She didn't dare to tell him more. Henrik glanced quickly into the basket. She could see the look of relief on his face and knew that it was because he saw that the packet was there, even though it was torn open. "Thank you," he said, and the relief was evident in his voice. Anne-Marie looked quickly around the familiar small boat. She could see down the passageway into the empty cabin. There were no sign of the Rosens or the others. Uncle Henrik followed her eyes and her puzzled look. "All is well," he said. "Don't worry, everything is all right." "I wasn't sure," he said, "but now," he eyed the basket in his hands, "because of you, Anne-Marie, everything is all right. You run home now and tell your mama not to worry. I will see you this evening." He grinned at her suddenly. "They took my bread, huh?" he said. "I hope they choke on it." And that's the end of chapter 15. So in the package we know was a handkerchief. We still don't know why Uncle Henrik needed the handkerchief. But what I want you guys to think about is, why do we think Uncle Henrik needs the handkerchief? I'm thinking myself, a handkerchief is just something that people normally like wipe their hands with, or sometimes they use it as like a Kleenex. Why would a handkerchief be so important to Uncle Henrik right now? Think about it. He's got those Jewish people on his boat somewhere. We don't know, but they're hidden somewhere. Why would he need a handkerchief? And why is it so important? I'm going to finish the next chapter probably tomorrow, And so I want you guys to think about that, and you can post in the comments on this video in our Google Classroom maybe why we think he needs the handkerchief. I'll tell you the title of the next chapter, since we always talk about how the titles are important to the chapter. The next chapter is titled, I Will Tell You Just a Little. And so remember, Anne-Marie doesn't know very much right now. And so I think she's probably going to learn quite a bit in the next chapter. Until then, be thinking, why does Uncle Henrik need that handkerchief? And post in the comments and tell me why. Okay? I miss you all. Talk to you later. Bye.